What happens if you really want to like a TV show, but every episode keeps getting worse? That's the situation that several Rings of Power reviewers have found themselves in. It started as a breathtaking return to Middle-earth. This is the series to end all fantasy series. And then over time, they just start looking at everyone else and like, yeah, it's kind of trash, isn't it? It actually turns out to be an epic disappointment. Half the series is down, and where are we? Well, we're basically where we started. We just know some people's names. Over 4 hours are down, and the shiny sets may have convinced people at first, but even if you like the landscapes, the sets, the costumes, or even the script, you can't help but deny one solitary fact. It is so boring. He genuinely thought it was off to an incredible start, introducing Middle-earth alive with glittering elven cities, and it seems he was taken in because the first 2 episodes just bounced around so much that it felt like a lot was happening, despite the fact that none of it went anywhere. I thought it was set up that meaty character development would come later, and alas, we still find ourselves waiting for anything to happen that we care about. The orcs are the very best thing about it, although that may just be the evil Harfoot making them look good. I saw a lot of potential in the first 2 episodes, but I'm a little bummed right now. Truly brilliant special effects, a gorgeous soundtrack, but the weird slow motion horse riding scene and an uncanny smile, the sloppy writing and pacing issues have now slipped further in episode 4. Galadriel is both insufferable and grating, and he's really to gain any affection for the characters, although he wants to like them. It seems like he just can't. Even the thumbnail of his video just goes, "This is not good." And that is from a Rings of Power fan who thought it was breathtaking in the first 2 episodes. And as someone who saw this already play out in Wheel of Time, I'm just sitting here like, yeah, first time. The first 2 episodes of that broke canon, but it at least a bit followed some of the story events. But then from episode 3 onwards, it just burnt the books and anything went, and it really feels that that's what this series has done already. The issue is, when you throw anything out of meaning, what do you have left? What, soap opera drama? Are we going to follow a family that just shouts at the siblings?
I wasn't talking to you!
Better throw a meaningless romance in here, that'll get them hooked.
And here I thought your talent centered at draftsmanship.
Scrubbing is good for dexterity.
And the last one to finish pays for dinner.
I'm not in the habit of going off with strange young men.
Yeah, Amazon have massively misjudged the series. Hiring people who have no idea what they're doing isn't a good strategy. Like this, from The Guardian. Episodes 1 and 2, it's like TV you've never seen before. And I'd say, yes, I've never seen anything this boring before, but they meant it as a compliment. It's hugely anticipated Talk on Tolkien, so packed with scale and ambition, it's only matched by Marvel's biggest budget offerings. There's a trend you see in all these premiere reviews. Oh yeah, episode 1 and 2, I mean, they're really big, grand, and shiny, and they have lots of potential. I mean, call me crazy, but I judge what I'm provided with now, not what it could possibly be at some point in the distant future, maybe. But even the people that were so wide-eyed and fluffy-tailed, full of hope and anticipation, all eventually come to admit that episode 4, yeah, it's just another plodding episode. Most characters are no further along on their journeys by the end of it than they were at the start. But it does hint that something might happen next week. Oh yeah, the last few episodes have been trash, but don't worry, next week will be good, I'm sure. I mean, can you see the pattern? Yeah, everything that we've got from the past, you know, all the facts we could deal with, that's trash. But next week, that's bound to be an improvement. They did hint at it, just like they hinted at it with episodes 1 and 2. Oh, it may have been boring, but it was packed with scale and ambition. They seem to have simultaneously mastered calling the current episode trash, but going, well, you better tune in next week, because it might get better.
But there's much hair still to grow on her toes as sense between her ears.
And you see this attitude all over the place. Like, we had IGN. For the first 2 episodes, there's some good in this premiere, and it's worth fighting for. Yes, the first 2 episodes were boring, but they really set up something that could be good in the future. He even gave the first 2 episodes a 7 and then a 9, because they got the setup out of the way, which allows us to plunge into the world and its relationships. Fully admitting that the Rings of Power just destroys Tolkien's lore, and saying it gets caught up in exposition. But you know, it's just the first 2 episodes. They just want to build things, set things in motion for the future, so that all the future episodes can be really great. These defenses are all over the place. It's slow, it's setting things up, it's a slow burn, all of which is code for boring. And all reviews which base their scores on a potential future value rather than what's already in front of them in the episodes as they currently exist. And this doesn't work in the long term. No matter how long you try and grab onto it, eventually people have to admit the truth, that it's just not very good. And episode 4 really seems to be the one driving that home with people. Which is why by episode 4 everyone's changing their minds. Episode 4 is just Jorin and Elrond sharing their daddy issues. This is an hour-long serialized show and the plot has barely pushed forwards and you haven't even learned much more about the characters or their world. That's an indication that something's gone wrong in the writer's room. This is the same website that gave episode 1 and 2 a 7 and a 9. It only took till episode 4 and they're like, yeah, this series has gone off the rails. What on earth are you writing in there, folks? Episode 4 is frustratingly slow. The Numenor plot has a few strong moments, but spends too much time on Isildur's sister, someone who so far I can't think of a reason why she exists. She just teleports from location to location, staring at things. And no, I don't care if he gave that guy a sponge bath.
So sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right, honestly.
There's websites for that. I don't need it in Rings of Power. But Rings of Power is starting to feel just derivative of the fantasy landscape as a whole. It could stand to pick up the pace a bit and largely retread plots and relationships which have already been laid out in previous episodes, trafficking a deeply worn fantasy cliches. Isn't it amazing that when you take Tolkien and then just burn the books and throw them out the window, suddenly what you're left with, you know, the thing that came out of your head and not the author's, everything just feels so generic, like it's just another fantasy series. Just like Wheel of Time. It's almost like we've done this before with the same company. For a world to be recognizable and distinct, it actually has to stick to what was written in the first place. You can't go around chopping and changing things because it's a cohesive universe that can't be split up into its foundational elements and just moved and teleported all over the place. That's what the showrunners thought they could do. Oh, we can take the bits we like and then just make it up ourselves. It'll definitely feel the same, we promise. It turns out that when you don't actually want to adapt Tolkien's work, you want to reflect what the world actually looks like, then you don't end up with something that feels like Tolkien's work. You end up with generic fantasy. Why? Because everything modern is done with the exact same reason. It's created for the same purpose, and it's all meant to reflect what the world actually looks like. Not just an area, not one culture. No, the entire world is viewed from the American perspective. That means that every single fantasy property always ends up feeling the same. And if you come out with a world that looks boring and generic, just some weird random grey mush, you're not able to conjure up the feelings or the emotions that people have tied to Tolkien's work or the movies. No matter how much you try, no matter how many references you put in your work, it just doesn't feel the same because you've changed it. And if something just looks generic, then everything else becomes even more important because they've got to carry the weight now. Your script has to be incredible, your ideas and stories are gripping, there has to be hooks in there because you've already destroyed the base foundation of why you bought the IP in the first place, in that it was instantly recognizable as what it was meant to be. By changing that, you destroyed the hook that you paid $250 million to get the rights to. And then what did you do? Well, your story is just trafficking in deeply worn fantasy cliches. And by leaving the book, something that would be easy to adapt because it's already written for you, you put all the weight, all the required genius or creativity on people with barely any experience. An uncredited writer on Star Trek Beyond. Honestly, I don't really understand what your plan was, but I'd think the outcome from it should have been obvious to you. The more you stick to the source material, which people already like, the easier your job is. The more you move away from it, the more talented people you must have on your team. And yet, it seems to be exactly the opposite thing that Amazon cares about. That's how we end up in this critic situation, where the Rings of Power continues the legacy of Peter Jackson's films in the first 2 episodes. The most expensive series of all time, clearly and consciously echoes the Jackson movies, is visually stunning, and they're impressed so far. But then time moves on, the budget isn't as impressive as it used to be. That grey generic mush of having it look like the real world begins to grate, and you start to judge the show not based off something that actually supports your ideas about what the world should be, but instead on the quality of the show itself. And all roads lead to Rome. The simple fact that, yeah, okay, stuff's happening, but is it really getting to them quickly enough? Even the people trying to be polite just come back to, why is it so boring? Slow pace aside, the show parrots real-world rhetoric. The show could really do with cutting out a few characters. Who could have guessed that a character that just goes around staring at things wouldn't be interesting in a TV series?
Either blind or an elf lover. Just like her father.
But as the showrunners said, they had to add some female energy to the family. How are we supposed to keep things interesting if we don't mimic what the world actually looks like? Gone was any idea of entertainment. We are so focused on our one mission that everything else came afterwards, to the point where we will force in characters that have no place in the story, contribute nothing to it, and have no entertainment value, where even reviewers that want to like the show want them cut, simply because we had to get our quota of people on our page right. Call me crazy, but when you're making $1 billion show, it might be time to sort your priorities out right, making sure you actually get people in the role which contribute something, that your show is actually good, before your casting choices start looking like you're trying to balance an algebra equation. Yes, X must equal 30%. Despite the fact that they think there are some lovely little touches to this episode, some small things that are fun, we desperately need some movement on the major plot lines. We are halfway through season 1, and no one has provided any answers, or indeed, I think, asked any questions. No, just saying a character's name isn't enough to make me care about them. The dude cried over an orc and spouted off like a pompous arse for a couple of minutes. Quite frankly, I was more entertained when he was out of focus. And there's a second thing that keeps being brought up throughout many reviews, and it's something I do myself, and it's not a compliment, and that is comparing it to the Wheel of Time series. The Wheel of Time books are awesome. The series is complete and utter trash. And yet this is IGN comparing it to Wheel of Time, and this is The Escapist doing the exact same thing. And believe me, when you're saying the aesthetic feels closer to Wheel of Time than House of the Dragon, oh boy is that scathing, especially with the sheer amount of money that they've spent on this series. Wheel of Time was an absolute abomination, with its finale CGI looking like it was made on a PlayStation 1, and yet once again they're reduced to the criticism that it looks very generic. The Rings of Power feels curiously like old-fashioned television, and it's interesting to note how much of the series leans on mystery boxes, despite the fact that it's a prequel to a story that everybody already knows. We've literally had a mystery box that came out to be Mithril, which everybody's already heard of, and the mystery inside that box was revealed in trailers months ago. But a recurrent problem does seem to be if you fill your staff full of people who have no idea what they're doing, you end up with a show that has no idea what it's doing and simply falls back on tried and tested tropes. There's a strong sense that the production team is desperate to keep viewers watching and doesn't necessarily trust the characters or the drama to do that on their own. As a result, there's a lot of narrative games being played, and that doesn't really work when you simultaneously think your audience is stupid, to the point where you explain the same thing 4 different times in 4 different ways. Galadriel explaining what Sauron's mark means being a key example of that. And once again, we get the exact same criticism that we've had previously. It feels much smaller than it did 2 weeks ago, when people were too blinded by the sweeping drone footage of landscapes and the massive budget, when we've got to praise the casting decisions because it just makes things look like the real world, and that's just objectively good for some reason. But when that novelty fades away and you're left with the show, oh yeah, it's just generic fantasy television. It's not unique, it's not different, there's nothing about it which is just recognizably Lord of the Rings. No, instead, it's just like every other piece of generic modern entertainment. All it does is reflect what the world actually looks like. And because it's not special or unique, different in any way to naturally draw people in, they're forced to use psychologically manipulative things like mystery boxes to try and trick you into being interested. Oh, there's a hook here somewhere. It'll be better in the future, we promise. Just tune in next week where you'll find out the answer. Ignore the quality of this week. Next week will be better, we promise. Even the people that like it, even the reviews which praise the current episode, still prove that they've been taken in by that very same trick. Episode 4 expertly blends triumph and tragedy. We're halfway through the series and it's bringing the stories together. Why do they feel that episode 4 is so good? Well, you know, it's kicking off. It's about to kick off. At some point it'll kick off. Yeah, it's good because it's briskly moving to a grander story. It's no longer fixated on introducing new characters and plot lines. At the halfway mark, we're just about ready to cut loose and get back into the season, poised to deliver the high fantasy goods as its story ramps into high gear. Even CBR, which is trying to say it's good, is still going, yeah, if we just hang on a bit more, it'll get good eventually. I think. Maybe. And CBR is desperate to love the show. And that's kind of why I can't take them seriously. Anyone that describes episode 4 as swashbuckling, I kind of think you're being so overly positive, you're just taking the piss. Especially when all of your conclusion is, yeah, the first 4, I mean, they were slow, but we're just building things, building up a grander story, and it's gonna deliver on it at some point in the future. Just keep watching, that's all we need you to do. I mean, Games Radar is so desperate to try and find anything positive to talk about in their very positive review that they're actually desperate to have 2 episodes at a time. They're trying to be positive. I don't think they realize how damning it is when they went that episode 3 is so boring, it took 2 episodes just to explain the political situation of Numenor, considering barely anything was said in the first place, and it took them 2 hours to do it. And reading the positive reviews is good for linguistic skills, if nothing else, as you try and find out how many different ways that people can actually say the word boring. From Variety, the Rings of Power is in no great rush to reveal its secrets. Instead, it takes a cue from Gandalf, and arrives precisely when it means to. Few fictional worlds put as much emphasis on the journey as they do on the destination, and remains a leisurely stroll, which is occasionally punctuated by things happening. But don't worry, it's unlikely to stay that way for long, because you don't spend $1 billion on a Lord of the Rings series and have it stay like this. Oh no, it's definitely going to improve in the future. Just keep watching, folks. Maybe episode 5 will be good. I mean, I did like 1 to 4, yeah. It was incredibly boring. It was incredibly boring, but it was so good that I just want to keep watching just in case something happens there, because it certainly didn't before. Seriously, these reviews sound like someone's got a gun to their head. The first half of the series was boring, but you know, I like boring. Honestly, no, I really liked boring TV where nothing happens. Maybe episode 5 will have something happen. That'll be fun to watch, won't it, guys? Just keep watching. And I think that's going to be really interesting to track in the future, because we're all watching the same show. We can see what's happening. We know who's being authentic and who isn't. And watching the dominoes fall over as people just realize in real time what's happening is so interesting. That's how you end up with people going, yeah, I did like the first 2 episodes. I was taken in by stuff. I thought it was breathtaking. The budget is massive. And I really liked the casting choices because it reflected the real world. Oh, it's just an epic disappointment, isn't it? Because it's really generic and dull and just looks like everything else. Because everything just reflects the real world nowadays. Oh, it's almost like the fundamental foundations that you've decided to base modern entertainment on are trash. And you shouldn't do it. Or hire people that think that's a good idea. It's almost like sticking to the source material, which is what the fans actually want, is common sense. But until the entertainment industry realizes what everyone already knows, and they actually have the spine to do it, well, instead, we'll just get to track the reviews. How people's choices just keep on changing. This is TV like you've never seen before, because it's more boring than anything else around. Oh, Tolkien fans will fall in love with it after the first 2 episodes. Well, you know, I mean, it's building to something, but at the moment, it's really boring. Everything's just so generic. But don't worry, if you just keep watching, it could well be regarded as one of the great fantasy works of the 2020s. I mean, when it's all said and done, who knows, maybe it'll get good by season 3. If you just stay through the monotony and the boredom and the terrible writing, maybe eventually they'll learn how to do it. The argument and the cope is amazing, and watching people realize it in real time isn't something I thought I'd get to see. And seeing which side people dare fall into. Because you've got the people that are like, yeah, we know what this is going to be like, because we already saw it with Wheel of Time. And then people are like, yeah, it is actually trash, isn't it? It's boring. And then you've got the people who can't give up. The people whose identities are wrapped up in this thing. I mean, this reflects the real world. That's far more important than entertainment. I have to support this. I have to keep watching no matter how bored I am, in the desperate hope that at some point in the future, maybe in episode 5, it can cut loose and deliver on the high fantasy goods that they assume will appear out of thin air. All because despite the fact that this feels like generic fantasy television, they did spend $1 billion on it, and so it has to improve eventually, right? That's a guarantee. When you spend $1 billion on something, it's good. That's the default statement, right? You can't spend $1 billion on something and have it be this bad forever. Right? Because I judge what's in front of me. I judge what you've provided, not what some potential future might be, maybe, because of a budget. And I think if that's what you're going off, just the fact that they spent a lot of money on something and therefore it has to get good eventually, the only word I can use to describe that is cope. Well, those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe. More videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.